Let's be honest, board games were humanity's earliest therapy sessions. Only instead of talking about our feelings, we destroyed family bonds over who forgot to say Uno. But the story of these cardboard battlegrounds didn't start in a suburban living room during game night. No, it began thousands of years ago, in a time when entertainment meant either watching someone juggle torches or inventing complicated rules for moving carved stones around a grid. And if that doesn't scream fun, just remember, Monopoly has been causing passive-aggressive silence since 1935. Hello, travelers. Histories do not always need to be boring. You can rest here and listen to hilarious histories to drift off to sleep. Tonight, we will explore the topic, the origin story of popular board games, and many more. Before we continue, leave a comment to let me know when and where you are listening to this, and hit the subscribe button, but only if you enjoy what I do here. Let's begin. Senet, Egypt's favorite way to kill time, and possibly the afterlife. Long before Candyland or Catan, there was Senet, an ancient Egyptian board game dating back to at least 3100 BCE. That's right, this game is so old it probably came free with a pyramid. Senet was played on a grid of 30 squares, and pieces were moved based on the roll of sticks. Yes, sticks. Dice hadn't been invented yet, so Egyptians did what anyone facing eternal boredom would do, toss twigs and call it math. But this wasn't just a casual pastime. Senet was believed to represent the soul's journey through the afterlife, dodging obstacles and trying not to land on a square called House of Waters, which sounds peaceful but was actually more of a spiritual timeout. In modern terms, Senet was Candyland. If Candyland judged your moral worth and decided your fate in the afterlife. And forget prizes. If you won, you probably just got buried with the game and hoped the gods didn't have house rules. Chess, the game of kings, queens, and that one guy who only moves in L's. If Senet was about sneaking your soul past cosmic roadblocks, then chess was about planning your opponent's downfall 6 moves in advance, or pretending to, while actually panicking because you just sacrificed your queen for strategy. Chess was born in India around the 6th century CE, when it was known as Chaturanga, a game so complicated it made Monopoly look like tic-tac-toe. Each piece represented a different unit in the Indian army: infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots. In other words, it was war, but the safe, indoor kind where the only casualty was your ego. As the game spread westward, it got a glow-up. Persia gave it the name Shatranj, the Islamic world gave it poetry, and medieval Europe gave it court drama. Suddenly, the elephant became a bishop, the chariot turned into a rook, and the queen, who originally had limited movement, was promoted into the most powerful piece on the board, which, in medieval Europe, was the board game equivalent of Beyoncé being elected pope. By the 15th century, chess had taken over royal courts, monastery libraries, and anyone with a beard long enough to stroke thoughtfully. Kings played it, nobles swore by it, and peasants probably weren't invited to play because they couldn't afford a board or the free time. But for all its royal flair, chess was also the first game to teach generations of players the cruelest lesson of all, that you can plan for hours, think you've got it all figured out, and still get destroyed by someone's younger cousin who just likes the horsey. And while today it's a symbol of intelligence and elegance, don't be fooled. At its heart, chess is a highly strategic way to say, I'm smarter than you, using 32 tiny sculptures and about 3 hours of polite vengeance. Now, from the hallowed halls of kings and queens, let's jump forward a few centuries to a board game born not out of war, but out of wrath. One that began with high ideals and turned into a capitalist cage match that has ruined more childhoods than expired milk. Yes, we're talking about Monopoly. Monopoly is the board game equivalent of being mugged by your own family with paperwork. It's loud, it's long, and it always ends with someone flipping the board, someone else hoarding orange properties like they're made of gold, and at least one person mysteriously vanishing when it's their turn to mortgage Baltic Avenue. But here's the twist. Monopoly didn't start out as a cutthroat capitalist showdown. No, the original game, created in 1903 by a woman named Lizzie McGee, was called the Landlord's Game, and it was actually an anti-monopoly tool. That's right. The whole point was to warn people about the dangers of unchecked real estate greed. The fact that it turned into the exact opposite is peak historical irony. Like if a fire safety manual became the blueprint for arson. Meiji's version had two sets of rules, one where everyone shared the wealth brewing, and one where one person got rich and everyone else suffered. Ding ding ding, we have a winner. Spoiler alert, people hated the sharing version and loved the pain. Fast forward to the 1930s, in the depths of the Great Depression, because nothing says fun like pretending to be a property tycoon while eating dinner out of a can, and a man named Charles Darrow took Meiji's idea, tweaked it, and sold it to Parker Brothers. He told them he invented it. He did not, but in true Monopoly fashion, he profited anyway. Soon, Monopoly was in every home, teaching children critical life skills like collecting rent from their grandma, how to go to jail without committing a crime, and that railroads are always a solid investment. Let's be honest, nobody actually enjoys Monopoly. We just enjoy winning Monopoly, which almost never happens, because by hour 3, you've lost your will to live, and are trying to use chance cards as kindling, and the tokens, a chaotic mix of 1930s pocket clutter, a top hat, a boot, a thimble, a dog. At no point do these items explain why they're racing to buy Illinois Avenue. But we accept it, because Monopoly is less a game, and more a slow psychological breakdown with pastel money. Still, love it or hate it, Monopoly is a cultural icon. It's been localized to over 100 countries, themed for everything from Star Wars to The Simpsons, and remains the fastest way to find out who in your life is secretly a ruthless slumlord in a top hat. Now, after all this economic trauma, let's take a break from mortgages and murder the old-fashioned way by accusing your friends of bludgeoning a man in a mansion. Yes, it's time for Clue. Clue. The game where someone's been murdered, everyone's dressed suspiciously well for a crime scene, and the key to victory is shouting, "It was Colonel Mustard in the library," with the wrench, like you're at a dinner party hosted by Agatha Christie, and mild psychosis. Invented in 1943 by British musician Anthony Pratt, Clue, originally called Murder, because subtlety is for cowards, was born out of boredom during World War II air raids. You know, just your average, the bombs are falling, let's design a homicide simulation to pass the time kind of vibe. Makes Monopoly's Great Depression escapism look downright wholesome. The idea was simple. A mansion full of guests, one of whom is a killer, and the rest are nosy enough to solve it with nothing but deductive reasoning and deeply concerning access to blunt objects. The suspects were based on stereotypical British guests at a country house: Professor Plum, Miss Scarlet, Mrs. Peacock. Basically the entire cast of a very polite soap opera with a high body count. But the real charm of Clue is how it makes murder feel like high tea. Someone's been viciously done in, but nobody's screaming. Instead, you calmly circulate the room with a notepad, asking things like, "Pardon me, but do you happen to possess the lead pipe?" It's all very civil for what is essentially CSI, Tea and Crumpets edition. And let's talk about the murder weapons. A rope, a revolver, a candlestick. Basically the contents of a Home Depot with an attitude problem. The wrench alone raises so many questions. Was it murder, or just a really intense attempt at plumbing? The board itself is a dream of old-school elegance. Billiard rooms, conservatories, secret passages. And yet every game eventually devolves into a chaotic mess of false accusations, second-guessing, and someone getting booted from the ballroom because they insisted the dagger had vibes. What Clue taught us, more than anything, is that murder is manageable as long as you can cross-reference it in a grid. It also subtly prepared us all for adulthood by reinforcing this critical life lesson. Trust no one, and always suspect the guy in mustard. And once you've solved the crime and ruined the social lives of 6 fictional characters, what better way to unwind than trying to survive the whimsical horrors of life itself? Next up, a game that reminds you you'll never be rich, stable, or emotionally prepared for parenthood, but in a fun way. Yes, we're talking about the game of life. The game of life is a board game that answers the question, what if we made growing up, getting married, taking on crushing debt, and dying fun? Originally invented in 1860 by Milton Bradley. Yes, the Milton Bradley, the original version wasn't quite the colourful midlife crisis simulator we know today. It was called the checkered game of life, and it looked like someone tried to design a board game using a moral compass and a ruler. Instead of plastic cars and college loans, it offered thrilling paths like honour, industry, poverty and ruin. In short, it was less game night with the family and more life coaching from a Puritan. Fast forward 100 years to 1960, when the game got its Technicolor glow-up. It was reimagined into the psychedelic spin-fest we know today, complete with 3D pop-up buildings, rainbow-colored pathways, and a wheel that spins like it's about to determine the fate of Westeros. In life, you begin as a bright-eyed teenager, and immediately have to decide, do you go to college, or straight into a career? This choice will haunt you for the next hour and 15 minutes. College gives you more job options, but it also buries you in debt. So, realism achieved. Meanwhile, skipping college might land you a high-paying job, or just a vague, low-income card that says dancer and offers no further explanation. As you travel the winding road of life, your little plastic car gains passengers, a spouse, children, twins, if the wheel's feeling spicy. At some point, you'll buy a house, take out insurance, lose your savings to a spin of fate, and probably become a doctor making $100K, while your best friend the mechanic rakes in $130K, because fairness is a lie and life is chaos. But don't worry, no matter how wildly unfair things get, it all ends the same way. You retire, either to millionaire estates, if you did well, or countryside acres, which sounds peaceful but is basically the board game equivalent of, you tried your best, sweetie. Life is a game that starts with promise and ends in judgment. Just like life. And yet, we play it again and again, determined to beat the odds, raise perfect children, and not land on midlife crisis, start over. It's educational, emotional, and existentially confusing. But it has one undeniable charm. It lets you live out an entire life in under 2 hours, with no real consequences, except maybe a sore wrist from spinning that wheel so hard. Now, after all that spinning and soul-searching, let's rewind the clock, not to birth, but to wordplay. A game that has caused more family feuds than Monopoly, and more spelling-induced rage than autocorrect. Coming up next, Scrabble. The game that taught us vocabulary can be violent. Scrabble is the board game that makes you feel smart right up until you realize your cousin just scored 62 points with the word Zax, and you're still trying to spell cat, invented in the 1930s by Alfred Butts. Yes, that's really his name. And yes, we will pretend we're mature enough not to laugh. Scrabble is the love child of crosswords and an old-fashioned spelling bee with a grudge. During the Great Depression, Butts decided the world needed a game that combined vocabulary, strategy, and the soul-crushing realization that you don't know how to spell rhythm. He originally called it Lexico, which sounds like a knockoff cough medicine, then renamed it Criss Crosswords, which sounds like a pop band that opens for the dictionary. Eventually, a guy named James Bruno bought the rights, gave it the zippier name Scrabble, which literally means to scratch frantically, and by the 1950s it had become the gold standard of passive-aggressive intellectual competition. Here's how Scrabble works. You get 7 tiles, and you try to build words on a board in a way that makes you look brilliant, while making it impossible for anyone else to play. It's basically the board game version of trying to one-up someone in a book club. You start with innocent little words like dog and run, but soon things escalate. Suddenly someone's playing Quizify on a triple-word score, and you're sitting there with 4 vowels and a single, useless K, wondering if you're even literate. And let's not forget the sacred rule, no made-up words. This leads to the classic Scrabble showdown. One person triumphantly lays down za. Everyone else screams, that's not a word. And then you all frantically dig out the dog-eared dictionary like it's a court case. Turns out za is short for pizza. Congratulations, the English language is a lawless place. Scrabble teaches valuable life lessons, like how to stay calm when someone plays oxyphenbutazone for 1,000 points. Yes, it's real. Or how to politely accuse your mother of cheating without being written out of her will. And yet, despite the chaos, there's nothing like the smug satisfaction of placing a high-point word and watching your friends mentally draft a hit list. It's not about winning, it's about making people think twice before inviting you to game night again. Scrabble isn't just a board game, it's psychological warfare with consonants. And now, after all that verbal violence, how about we lighten the mood with a game that requires no reading, no vocabulary, and no mercy, just loud colours and small acts of betrayal. Next up, Uno, the friendship killer disguised as a card game. Uno, skip, reverse, regret. Repeat, Uno is the game that proves you don't need complex strategy or intellectual depth to destroy trust. All you need is a reverse card, a draw 4, and the kind of cold, calculated ruthlessness usually reserved for Bond villains. Invented in 1971 by a barbershop owner named Merle Robbins. Because why not? Uno was originally just a fun twist on the card game Crazy Eights. Merle and his family loved playing it so much they printed 5,000 copies and started selling them out of their house. Then, a friend invested $8,000 in the idea, which is either the best or most dangerous $8,000 ever spent. And before long, Uno was everywhere. The premise? Simple. Get rid of all your cards before your opponents do, and scream, Uno, with the kind of desperate joy usually reserved for lottery winners and surprise tax refunds. If you forget to say UNO, your opponents will pounce on you with the speed and precision of hyenas at a buffet, forcing you to draw 2 cards and crushing your dreams of victory in a single heartbeat. Let's talk about the cards. There's Skip, which says, you don't get to play because I don't like your face right now. There's Reverse, which is basically Uno's way of giving you a smug little time machine. And then there's Draw 2, which is polite compared to the thermonuclear warhead that is Draw 4 Wild. A card so toxic it should come with a hazmat suit and a warning label. The wild cards. Oh, they're pure madness. You pick the color, you ruin someone's life, and you feel absolutely no remorse. Bonus points if you play it while maintaining unbroken eye contact. That's the Uno experience. Petty vengeance with a splash of rainbow. And don't even get us started on house rules. Some households allow stacking draw 2s. Others claim you can slap down a matching number no matter the color. Some allow jump-ins, where chaos reigns and no one knows whose turn it is. Eventually every game devolves into someone yelling, that's not the real rule, and someone else responding, it is in this house. Welcome to Uno, where the only consistent rule is that no one agrees on the rules. But here's the thing, you'll still play it. Again and again. Because even when your grandma ruthlessly skips you 3 times in a row, and your best friend drops a draw 4 like they're cutting you out of the will, Uno remains one of the simplest, most chaotic, most magically evil games ever invented. And once you've barely survived the Uno carnage with your dignity in shreds, what better way to cool down than by playing a game about medieval conquest and long-term strategy that lasts longer than some relationships? Next up, Risk. The game that teaches you diplomacy is just the part before betrayal. Risk is the board game where you pretend to be a military genius, but mostly just end up begging Greenland not to revolt and plotting against your best friend because they looked at you funny during deployment. Invented in 1957 by Albert Lamouris, a French filmmaker who clearly thought Monopoly didn't cause enough pain, Risk was originally called La Conquête du Monde, or The Conquest of the World. So subtlety was never part of the plan. It was later picked up and anglicized by Parker Brothers, who apparently decided global domination should be family fun. The rules are deceptively simple: control territories, build armies, conquer continents, and eliminate your enemies. You begin with grand ambitions and end with bitter vendettas, emotional scars, and the realization that rolling a pair of 6s is more valuable than any actual strategy. Now, let's talk about Australia. Every game has that one player who picks Australia, locks it down like it's Fort Knox, and quietly builds an unstoppable army of vengeance. They sit there with one entry point, hoarding reinforcements every turn, while the rest of the board bleeds out in brutal skirmishes. By the time anyone notices, Australia has become a terrifying land of military doom, led by a smug commander with a koala on their shoulder and a thirst for blood. Then there's Europe, a tempting prize because it gives you loads of troops. But it's also the strategic equivalent of building your house on a freeway. Everyone wants it. No one holds it. Occupying Europe in Risk is like wearing a meat suit in a shark tank. As for the dice, ah yes, the great equalizer and destroyer of dreams. You can have a full army stacked to the ceiling, but if the dice don't like you that night, your 15 tanks will lose to 3 scrappy infantry from Siam. Risk is less about tactics and more about sacrificing your dignity to the gods of random number generation. And let's not forget the alliance is temporary, fragile, full of whispered promises and betrayal. You'll form pacts, make handshakes, and then backstab your closest ally in North America, because, hey, it's called Risk. not Friendship Simulator 5000. The betrayal will be swift, devastating, and followed by the phrase, "It's just a game," spoken through gritted teeth. But in the end, someone will emerge victorious. Usually the person who said, "I've never played before," which is either a bold-faced lie or a genius bluff. They'll stand atop the board, ruler of the ruins, while the rest of the players stare blankly at their empty soda cans, the wreckage of their once thriving empires, and the knowledge that they won't trust anyone at the table for at least 6 months. Risk isn't just a game, it's a full geopolitical drama that starts with strategy and ends with betrayal, much like actual geopolitics, only with fewer war crimes and more snacks. Now that we've conquered the world and destroyed every bond of trust within the room, how about something a little less intense? Something that relies on quick thinking, teamwork, and the ability to shout nonsense at a tiny hourglass. Next up, Taboo, the game where you know exactly what the word is, but you're legally not allowed to say anything useful. Taboo is the game that answers the question, what if charades had a baby with a nervous breakdown? Created in 1989 by Brian Hirsch, Taboo is a party game where you try to get your teammates to guess a word, but there's a twist. You can't say 5 or so of the most obviously helpful words related to it. You're given a target word like snowman, but you're banned from using snow, winter, cold, frosty, or carrot. Basically, you're stuck describing a frosty vegetable-nosed ghost without saying anything that would actually help. This is the game where you discover just how terrible your friends are at describing things. You'll watch grown adults flail around, shouting things like, "It's white, and it falls from the sky, but not a bird," while the rest of the team yells back, "Santa, a goose, climate change," and let's not forget the buzzer. That little device of doom wielded by the opposing team. Every time you accidentally say a forbidden word, they get to press it with the gleeful fury of someone who's been waiting their whole life to judge you. That sound, buzz, cuts through your sentence like a guillotine for thoughts. Taboo is where you'll watch your most eloquent friend crumble under pressure like a soggy cookie. They'll say things like, it's a thing that, you do it with your face. No, wait, not that face thing. You do it when you're happy. No, that word's on the list. Why is smile on the list? Cue the buzzer, cue the existential crisis. And don't think you're safe just because you're on the guessing side. That comes with its own chaos. Your teammate is sweating, flailing, making vague gestures toward the ceiling, while you shout random nouns like a confused parrot. Umbrella? Pancakes? Fidel Castro? None of it makes sense, and yet somehow, you both feel like you're so close. At some point, someone will guess the right word purely by accident. Something like grapefruit, shouted in desperation, and the entire team will scream like they just defused a bomb. The joy is real. The shame is deeper. Taboo doesn't just test your vocabulary, it tests your ability to not scream at your cousin when they can't guess. Toothbrush from your perfectly reasonable hint. It's like hygiene, but stabby. Despite all the shouting, sweating, and buzzer-induced trauma, Taboo remains a staple of game nights. Why? Because it's hilarious. Even when your brain short-circuits and you say, you know, that thing. The thing for the 10th time, everyone's laughing at you, but still laughing. And once you've recovered from your self-inflicted vocabulary wounds, maybe it's time to take it slow. Something more intellectual. Something that doesn't involve buzzer-based panic attacks. How about a word game with tiles, patience, and quiet judgment? Next up, Scrabble, where spelling becomes warfare and triple word scores are worth friendships. Scrabble. The game that tricks you into thinking it's about intelligence and language, when really, it's about quietly annihilating your opponents with obscure words and fake humility. Oh, you didn't know cat was a word? Weird. Invented in the 1930s by Alfred Butts. Yes, that's his real name, and no, he never tried to change it. Scrabble was originally called Lexico, which sounds like a failed energy drink. Butts, an out-of-work architect during the Great Depression, combined his love for anagrams and crosswords, and decided, you know what would make a fun game? Statistical letter distribution. That's right, Scrabble is built on math. Butts calculated how frequently letters appeared in the New York Times and assigned point values accordingly. That's why you get 1 measly point for an E, but 10 for a glorious, smug little Q. He basically turned the English language into a currency market. Gameplay is deceptively simple. You get 7 random letters, you make words on a board, and you score based on letter value and tile placement. But what actually happens is pure psychological warfare. Your sweet, bookish aunt suddenly turns into a cold-blooded word assassin. She slaps down Zephyr on a triple-word score and smiles at you like she didn't just ruin your self-worth. Meanwhile, you're staring at a rack of letters that spells out UUUOXI and wondering how you got here. Scrabble is also the only game where everyone becomes a lawyer. Is that a word? Someone asks, squinting at your latest masterpiece. Of course it is, you say, hoping they won't actually challenge you. But they do. Out comes the dictionary like a judge entering the courtroom. If your word isn't there, your entire move is yeeted into the void. It's humiliating. It's educational. It's Scrabble. Then there's the bingo. No, not the game with the numbers and the elderly players. In Scrabble, a bingo is when you use all 7 of your letters in one go. It earns you a 50-point bonus and the right to gloat for the next 3-5 business days. Pull off a bingo with a word like juxtapose or exhuming, and you're no longer a mere mortal, you are a lexical demigod. And yet, Scrabble also reminds us of our limits. There will always come that moment where, desperate and broken, you lay down the word it for 2 points, and your opponent calmly responds with quiz on a triple-letter Q, scoring 66 points while sipping tea like nothing happened. It's not just a game, it's a spelling duel with pride on the line. And in the end, you'll say, I let you win, while quietly looking up whether chi is a valid word for next time. Spoiler, it is, and you're welcome. But maybe you're tired of thinking, tired of spelling, tired of pretending you know what muzjik means. Maybe it's time to drop the pretense of brains and embrace a simpler, more primal form of competition. Like yelling at people while wearing a fake mustache and hunting criminals in 19th century Europe. If you've ever been judged for your stick figures, misunderstood a squiggly mess for a giraffe, or experienced the crushing disappointment of your team's close enough guess, then Pictionary is your playground of artistic terror. Created in 1985 by Robert Angel and Gary Everson, Pictionary was born from a simple question: what if you could lose friends by drawing terrible pictures? Spoiler alert, it works every time. The rules are straightforward: draw a word without saying anything, and your teammates try to guess it before time runs out. Sounds easy? Think again, because suddenly, that innocent attempt at bicycle looks more like a potato riding a unicycle, and your teammates shout guesses ranging from toaster to alien abduction. The timer ticks, pressure mounts, and somewhere in the chaos, your dignity flees the room. Pictionary isn't just a game, it's a test of communication, imagination, and how well your friends can interpret the hieroglyphics you call art. It reveals who's an optimist, that's definitely a tree, and who's brutally honest. Nope, that looks like a blob with legs. It also proves that no matter how bad you are, someone is always worse. There's always that one person whose drawings are so incomprehensible that you're convinced they're secretly mocking the entire game. But the best part? Watching your friends desperately try to guess your drawing, throwing out wild ideas like a confused chicken fighting a marshmallow, and the triumphant cheer when someone finally shouts the right answer, even if it was a lucky guess. Pictionary is the perfect blend of creativity, chaos, and good-natured frustration, reminding us all that sometimes it's okay to laugh at ourselves, especially when our artistic skills are questionable at best. Ready to move from pictures back to words, but with a competitive twist. Next, we'll unravel the mysterious charm of Boggle, the fast-paced word scramble that's equal parts brain teaser and friendship stress test. Imagine shaking a plastic cube filled with 16-lettered dice, then desperately trying to find as many words as possible before the timer screams, "Time's up." That's Boggle, the ultimate test of how fast your brain can scramble and how quickly your vocabulary crumbles. Created by Parker Brothers in 1972, because the 70s needed more reasons to stare at dice instead of disco balls, Boggle invites players to hunt for words by connecting adjacent letters in any direction. Simple, right? Well, yes, until you realize your best word is at, and your opponent's list looks like a Scrabble dictionary exploded. The catch? You can only score words that you find, and your opponents don't. So if you and your friend both spot cat, guess what? 0 points. Boggle isn't just about vocabulary. It's a sneaky game of outsmarting your opponent with obscure words no one else dares to find. It's the only game where you find yourself questioning your life choices, as you stare at a jumble of letters that almost spells something, but not quite. Is Kix a word? No? Damn. And that's when the timer feels like a cruel, ticking monster, mocking you as you scribble down it, hoping it counts for something. Boggle is pure adrenaline for your brain and pure agony for your ego. It's that one game where you go from confident wordsmith to desperate letter scavenger in 60 seconds flat. But when you finally find a word no one else does, even if it's Zephyr or Fjord, you feel like a linguistic champion, even if your victory dance looks more like a seizure. So if you're ready to put your brain to the test, and your friends to the misery of friendly competition, Boggle's got you covered. But after a few rounds, you might just want to trade those letter dice for some good old-fashioned chance. So there you have it. From sneaky murders at the manor, to dice-rolling world domination, to squiggly stick figures that pass for art, to frantic word hunts and sugary races to nowhere. The origin stories of some of the most popular board games you've probably fought over at family gatherings. Board games are more than just cardboard, dice and cards. They're tiny universes where friendships are tested, egos bruised and laughter, and sometimes shouting guaranteed. They remind us that a good time doesn't need fancy tech, just a bit of competition, some imagination, and the ability to laugh when your carefully crafted empire collapses, or your drawing looks like a confused chicken. Each game has its own unique charm. Clue teaches us to suspect everyone, including that one friend who just wants to play peacefully. Risk shows that world domination is just a dice roll away from total chaos. Pictionary reveals the terrifying truth that none of us are as good at drawing as we think. Boggle reminds us that sometimes the English language is a cruel, cruel mistress. So next time you sit down with your favorite board game, remember you're not just playing, you're stepping into centuries of history, innovation, and a little bit of madness. And if the game gets intense, just remember the golden rule. The real winner is the one who still wants to come back for another round. If history had a celebrity list, Doris Kearns Goodwin would be right up there. But instead of red carpets and paparazzi, she's surrounded by presidential libraries, dusty archives, and more historical documents than a Netflix conspiracy theory binge. Doris isn't just any historian. She's the historian who's earned the nickname Presidential Whisperer. Because when it comes to US presidents, she knows all the behind-the-scenes drama, the messy personal stuff, and the leadership highs and lows that textbooks conveniently skip. Her reputation, unmatched storytelling chops combined with a detective's eye for detail. You can think of her as the ultimate political drama narrator, but without the scripted drama, because, spoiler alert, real presidential history is way juicier than fiction. She's the kind of historian who can make Abraham Lincoln's struggles feel like an intense season of House of Cards, while also sneaking in leadership lessons that could probably help your boss stop sending those 3 a.m. emails. Doris's books have been on bestseller lists. Her expertise has shaped Hollywood movies. Yes, Lincoln owes a lot to her, and she's been a trusted voice on major TV shows, proving that history doesn't have to be boring. In fact, with her, it's often downright entertaining. So why is she so good at this? Because Doris doesn't just write history, she breathes life into it. She dives deep into presidential personalities, rivalries, triumphs, and scandals, showing us that behind every iconic speech and policy decision is a very human, sometimes awkward, sometimes brilliant person. In the next part, we'll see how Doris's own story began, from curious student to history superstar, and why she decided history was more about people and power than just dates and facts. Before Doris Kearns Goodwin became the go-to guru for presidential tales, she was just a kid with a curious mind, and maybe a slightly unhealthy obsession with history. Born in 1943 in Brooklyn, New York, yes, the land of bagels and traffic jams, Doris grew up fascinated by stories of the past. While other kids collected baseball cards, Doris was collecting biographies. Her parents must have been thrilled, right? Honey, your kid wants to read about dead presidents instead of playing outside. At some point, she probably gave more attention to Abraham Lincoln than to her math homework. Spoiler, that probably explains a lot. She attended Colgate University, where she earned her bachelor's degree in government. But don't let the word government fool you. This was the beginning of her lifelong mission to show that history isn't just about laws and dates. It's about people, power struggles, and the drama that makes politics so fascinating. Then came Harvard University, where Doris earned her PhD in government. Yes, Harvard, where even the library books have a certain prestige smell. During her time there, she realized that history wasn't just a dusty subject to memorize. It was a vibrant saga of ambition, rivalry, failure, and triumph. Basically, the original reality TV. One pivotal moment came early in her career, when she discovered how much presidents were just like the rest of us. Awkward, ambitious, prone to making mistakes, and sometimes downright stubborn. She realized history could teach lessons about leadership, resilience, and humanity, but only if you dug past the dates and speeches to the real stories beneath. And here's a fun little nugget. Early in her career, Doris was also a reporter and columnist, which helped hone her storytelling skills, because nothing teaches you to get to the point like deadlines, or trying to make a 3-hour congressional hearing sound interesting. By blending rigorous research with a knack for storytelling, and a little bit of gossip, Doris Kearns Goodwin set herself up to change how we see history. Not as a boring list of facts, but as a captivating story full of messy human characters, who just happen to be presidents. Doris Kearns Goodwin's path to becoming a history superstar wasn't paved with smooth, straight roads, more like the bumpy, twisty trails of a political campaign, complete with unexpected detours and a few, wait, what, moments. Growing up in Brooklyn in the 1940s and 50s, Doris wasn't exactly surrounded by presidential libraries or think tanks. Nope, she had to get creative. While other kids were trading comic books, she was trading historical facts, probably turning her family dinner conversations into something resembling a Senate hearing. Mom, did you know Lincoln wrote his own jokes? No? Well, now you do. Her early fascination with history wasn't just about presidents and wars. Doris has said she loved stories of all kinds. Stories of real people dealing with real problems, which is exactly what presidents do, just on a much bigger stage. She wasn't content with just memorizing facts. She wanted to understand the why and how behind the history. This curiosity led her to Colgate University, where she majored in government, but also where she likely realized that government wasn't going to be just dry laws and boring lectures. It was drama, strategy, and let's be honest, a lot of people trying to outwit each other in ways that make today's reality TV stars look like amateurs. At Harvard, pursuing her PhD, Doris was lucky enough to be surrounded by scholars who encouraged digging deep, not just accepting history as it was written, but questioning it, analyzing it, and finding the juicy stories beneath the surface. And boy did she find them. It's kind of like going to the grocery store for milk and coming out with a whole cake. You start looking for facts and end up with a full-blown narrative of political intrigue and human emotion. During this time, Doris honed a skill that would become her trademark, turning complex political and historical events into engaging narratives. This wasn't just for the sake of entertainment, though that was a happy side effect. It was because she believed that history only matters if people care about it. And let's face it, people care more when there's a little scandal, some rivalry, and maybe a bit of awkward presidential behavior. One of her first big lessons: presidents are just humans, and humans mess up a lot. They have egos, tempers, insecurities, and yes, sometimes bad hair days that affect their moods. This humanizing approach was a bit of a revolution in history writing, which before her time was often very formal and dry. Doris showed that you could respect history and still laugh at the moments that make it real. And here's something you don't always hear. Doris faced her own challenges along the way. Writing about history isn't glamorous. It's hours and hours spent buried in archives, wrestling with conflicting accounts and trying not to fall asleep under piles of dusty papers. It's a grind, and it takes a lot of patience and passion. But if you love the story, the grind becomes part of the adventure. So while the world saw Doris Kearns Goodwin as the sharp, polished historian who writes bestsellers and appears on TV, behind the scenes was a curious, tenacious researcher with a big heart for history's messy human side. Now, if there's one book that put Doris Kearns Goodwin on the history map like, oh hey, she's kind of a big deal, it's Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. The title alone sounds like a reality TV show, where contestants compete to become the ultimate president. but it's actually one of the most celebrated works of presidential history ever written. The concept is brilliant in its simplicity. Lincoln didn't just surround himself with yes men. Nope, he handpicked his political rivals. People who had run against him, people who doubted him, even people who probably wanted to see him fail, and turned them into his closest advisors. Think of it as inviting your frenemies to join your team and somehow making it work. Spoiler, it took a lot of Lincoln's patience and political savvy, and maybe a few headaches. Doris dove deep into letters, speeches, and diaries to uncover how Lincoln managed this delicate dance. Imagine having to keep peace in a group where everyone's ego is bigger than the room itself. It's like trying to referee a family dinner where everyone's arguing over the last piece of pie. But Lincoln's leadership style was different. He listened, he empathized, and he played the long game. Basically, he was the original political chess master. The book didn't just tell the story of Lincoln and his cabinet. It gave readers a front-row seat to the backstage drama of one of America's most turbulent times. There were betrayals, power plays, awkward silences at meetings, and moments of genuine respect and friendship, all mixed into the story of how a divided nation was held together. Team of Rivals wasn't just a hit with history buffs. It caught the attention of Hollywood. Steven Spielberg, looking for a compelling story for his 2012 film Lincoln, turned to Doris's book as his primary source. That means every intense scene with Daniel Day-Lewis playing Lincoln owed a nod to Doris's meticulous research and storytelling. So if you ever wondered why the movie feels like a political thriller and a history lesson rolled into one, thank Doris. The impact of Team of Rivals went beyond just sales and movies. It shifted how historians and the public think about leadership, showing that great leaders don't just command, they collaborate, sometimes with the very people who want to see them fail. It's a lesson that probably would have saved a lot of corporate meetings from turning into disaster. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a story where the underdog manages to turn a bunch of rivals into a winning team, especially when that story is about one of the most iconic figures in history? Let's dig a little deeper into Team of Rivals, a book so impactful it practically redefined how we think about leadership, politics, and yes, even reality TV drama. Before Doris wrote this masterpiece, Abraham Lincoln was often portrayed as the solitary, saintly figure, the tall guy with the beard, the stovepipe hat, and a heart of gold. Admirable, sure, but kind of one-dimensional. Doris peeled back that polished veneer to reveal a Lincoln who was brilliant and deeply human, full of contradictions, doubts, and yes, plenty of political savvy that might make today's power brokers blush. The real genius of the book is its focus on Lincoln's cabinet, a group as diverse and contentious as a family holiday dinner where everyone's fighting over the mashed potatoes. Lincoln brought together his former rivals, men who had run against him for president or had very different political views, and somehow convinced them to serve under his leadership. Now imagine trying to get these guys to agree on anything. It's like getting cats to do synchronized swimming, near impossible. There were frequent clashes, egos the size of Gettysburg, and moments when it looked like the whole thing might blow up spectacularly. But Lincoln's approach was surprisingly modern. He listened, respected opposing views, and understood that leadership wasn't about crushing rivals, but about channeling their strengths for a common goal. Doris's research for the book was exhaustive. She spent years digging through letters, diaries, and memoirs, piecing together the personalities and motivations of these historical figures. It's almost like she became a political detective, unraveling the complex relationships behind one of America's most defining moments. Her storytelling style brought the cabinet meetings to life. The tension, the compromises, the backroom deals, painting a vivid picture that felt more like a high-stakes drama than a history lesson. This approach made the past accessible and exciting for readers who might otherwise glaze over at the mention of executive branch dynamics. Then came the Spielberg connection. When Hollywood decided to tackle Lincoln's story, they turned to Doris's Team of Rivals as their Bible. Steven Spielberg wanted more than just a pretty picture of Lincoln. He wanted the political intrigue, the human complexity, the kind of leadership that involved navigating a minefield of competing egos and loyalties. Thanks to Doris, the film captured not just the grand speeches and Gettysburg Address, but the messy, often frustrating process behind making big decisions during the Civil War. Daniel Day-Lewis's Lincoln wasn't just a hero. He was a man grappling with impossible choices, trying to hold a fractured nation together, one awkward cabinet meeting at a time. Beyond just telling a great story, Team of Rivals reshaped how people think about leadership, highlighting collaboration, empathy, and humility as key traits, not just commanding presence or power. Doris showed that sometimes the best leaders aren't the ones who shout the loudest, but the ones who bring their rivals to the table and make them partners. And let's be real, who wouldn't want to see a reality show where political rivals are forced to live in a house and work together? Oh wait, that's Big Brother. But Doris's book was the original survivor of the cabinet story, without the camera crew, thankfully. So Team of Rivals wasn't just a book, it was a leadership manifesto disguised as history. And it cemented Doris Kearns Goodwin's reputation as the historian who makes presidents feel like real people, flawed, complicated, and sometimes downright hilarious. If Doris Kearns Goodwin had a superpower, it's taking what could be dry, dusty history and turning it into something that feels like a Netflix binge, minus the popcorn stains on your books. Her signature style, a masterful blend of sharp leadership lessons, juicy political drama, and just enough humor to remind you that presidents weren't some mythical beings carved from marble. Nope. They were real people with quirks, insecurities, and sometimes eyebrow-raising habits. Doris's knack for storytelling comes from her deep respect for the complexity of human nature. She doesn't just tell you what happened, she pulls back the curtain on why it happened. The motivations, the rivalries, the moments of doubt, and yes, the occasional presidential meltdown. Imagine if the founding fathers had Twitter back then. Doris helps us imagine those behind-the-scenes moments when things probably got a bit too real. She's also famous for weaving leadership wisdom into her narratives, without making it sound like a boring business lecture. Instead of leadership tip, #47, always communicate effectively, Doris shows you how Lincoln managed his temper, or how Theodore Roosevelt turned his bull moose personality into political capital. It's leadership lessons served with a side of wit and real-world drama. And let's talk about humor. Doris isn't afraid to let the funny moments shine, like the time she highlighted how Lyndon Johnson's larger-than-life personality and Texas charm sometimes left people both amused and exhausted. Kind of like that one uncle who tells the same story at every family reunion. Or how she pointed out that John Quincy Adams had a pet alligator in the White House, which definitely qualifies as presidential weirdness. By mixing these elements, Doris makes history feel alive, like you're sitting in the room with these leaders, hearing their jokes, witnessing their arguments, and maybe even rolling your eyes at their antics. This approach makes her work accessible to everyone, whether you're a history nerd or someone who just wants to know why the past matters without dozing off. Her books, lectures, and TV appearances have inspired millions to see history as a dynamic story of people, power, and perseverance, complete with all the messiness that comes with being human. Because at the end of the day, history isn't just dates and facts, it's the story of us all, with all our flaws and follies. Doris Kearns Goodwin's storytelling isn't just about what happened in the past, it's about how it happened and why it still matters today. Think of her as the friend who can make even the driest family reunion story feel like a blockbuster. That's no small feat when you're dealing with presidents, civil wars, and political rivalries that could give any soap opera a run for its money. Her secret sauce? She's got this uncanny ability to humanize historical figures, peeling back the layers of power suits and polished speeches to reveal the real people underneath. Presidents with their messy emotions, quirky habits, and moments of pure, unfiltered awkwardness. Because yes, even Abraham Lincoln probably had days when he wanted to hide under the desk and skip the cabinet meeting. Spoiler, Doris's research makes you believe that. Doris's books don't just parade out a series of dates and facts. Instead, they read like character-driven stories, full of drama, tension, and sometimes unexpected humor. Take Lyndon B. Johnson, for example. Doris doesn't just talk about his political achievements. She shares stories of his larger-than-life personality, his knack for making people both laugh and cringe, and his unique style of persuasion that sometimes involved charm that could feel more like a friendly wrestling match. You can almost hear the people around him thinking, here he goes again, but hey, it works. And then there's her way of weaving in leadership lessons that don't feel like a boring lecture. Instead of be a good communicator, she'll show you how Teddy Roosevelt's boundless energy and charisma inspired a nation, or how FDR's optimism helped pull America out of the Great Depression. It's leadership 101, but with real stories, real struggles, and the occasional presidential mishap thrown in for good measure. Another fun aspect? Doris doesn't shy away from the odd and quirky side of history, like John Quincy Adams' pet alligator, casually lounging in the White House bathtub. Yes, that happened. Or how Theodore Roosevelt once went on a hunting trip with a man-eating lion. Spoiler, the lion lost. These little anecdotes remind us that history isn't just about grand speeches and wars. It's about weird, funny, and downright human moments that make the past feel relatable. Doris's approach is also refreshingly approachable. You won't find dense academic jargon or pages of endless footnotes here. Instead, she writes with warmth and clarity, like she's telling you a story over coffee, the kind that makes you say, "Wait, what? Tell me more." Her work invites readers from all walks of life to dive in, no matter if you're a history buff or someone who only remembers history class as the one with too many dates. Because of this style, Doris's work appeals far beyond the history classroom. She's a frequent guest on TV shows, podcasts, and lecture circuits, always ready to drop a fascinating tidbit or a funny story that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about presidents and politics. In a world where politics often seems like a never-ending reality show, Doris's storytelling reminds us that behind the headlines are real people with real struggles, and sometimes a really good sense of humor. So, next time you find yourself stuck in a boring meeting, just remember, even Lincoln had to herd a bunch of rivals who probably wanted to throw things at each other. If he could survive that, so can you. If presidential families were reality TV stars, the Kennedys would definitely have their own primetime drama, full of glamour, tragedy, secrets, and more plot twists than a soap opera marathon. Doris Kearns Goodwin took a deep dive into the Kennedy clan, peeling back the glittering surface to reveal the complicated, sometimes heartbreaking realities behind the iconic smiles and glossy magazine covers. Her book, The Fitzgeralds and the Kennedys, isn't just a family biography. It's a saga of ambition, love, sacrifice, and the price of public life. It's like Game of Thrones, but with less dragons and more tailored suits. One of Doris's greatest strengths is showing us the human side of these almost mythic figures. For example, John F. Kennedy, known for his charisma and inspiring speeches, was also a man battling chronic pain and health issues, a fact often glossed over in the glossy retellings of his life. Doris's research reveals a JFK who struggled with the weight of expectations, the pressures of politics, and a rather intense collection of medications that would make your local pharmacy nervous. Then there's Robert F. Kennedy, the passionate younger brother who was both a fierce political force and a deeply emotional man. Doris doesn't shy away from the tensions within the family, the rivalries, and the moments when politics almost tore them apart. And let's not forget Jacqueline Kennedy, the First Lady, whose grace and style made her a global icon. But Doris also shows us the woman behind the pearls, someone who endured personal tragedy with remarkable strength and quietly shaped history in her own way. Through her storytelling, Doris takes us inside the Kennedy family home, the political battles, and the personal moments that made their story unforgettable. It's a mix of glamour and grit, heartbreak and hope. What makes this so compelling is how Doris balances respect with honesty. She doesn't turn the Kennedys into saints, nor does she revel in scandal. Instead, she presents them as real people, navigating a world that often demanded perfection, while wrestling with very human flaws. For listeners, it's a reminder that behind every headline, there's a story, sometimes inspiring, sometimes tragic, but always deeply human. If presidential families had their own Hollywood biopic, the Kennedys would be the scriptwriter's dream, full of charm, heartbreak, political intrigue, and just enough tragedy to make Shakespeare jealous. Doris Kearns Goodwin's The Fitzgeralds and the Kennedys pulls back the velvet curtain on this glittering dynasty and reminds us that behind every glamorous photo op, there's a human story full of messy emotions, sibling rivalries, and the kind of family drama that makes your last Thanksgiving dinner look like a walk in the park. Let's start with John F. Kennedy, the man who made Camelot sound like a weekend getaway, but who also carried more physical pain than a marathon runner lost in the desert. Doris's research pulls no punches, revealing JFK's lifelong battles with chronic back pain, Addison's disease, and a medicine cabinet that looked like a small pharmacy. Imagine trying to project youthful vigor when half the time you're on a cocktail of drugs that would make anyone feel like a zombie auditioning for The Walking Dead. But hey, at least he didn't have to worry about leg day at the gym. He probably just worried about leg pain. Then there's Robert F. Kennedy, the fiery younger brother who could switch from passionate political speeches to intense family dinners where emotions ran hotter than a midsummer barbecue. Doris doesn't shy away from the tension and sometimes brutal sibling rivalries that brewed beneath the polished public facade. RFK was both beloved and, at times, a handful, a man whose drive to change the world sometimes collided spectacularly with his own demons. If you think your family is complicated, just imagine trying to get along when your dinner conversations include nuclear policy and civil rights. Of course, no discussion of the Kennedys would be complete without Jacqueline Kennedy, the first lady who redefined cool long before cool was a thing. Doris paints a vivid picture of Jackie as more than just a style icon. She was a woman who faced the terrifying spotlight with quiet dignity, especially after the assassination of JFK. Behind those famous pearls and perfectly coiffed hair was a fiercely private person who understood the power of image, but also carried the weight of profound personal loss. And yes, she made the White House tour so captivating that you half expected Martha Stewart to pop out and say, "Let me know if you want a cup of tea." Doris also reveals the hidden cracks in this seemingly perfect family, from Joe Kennedy's ambitious and sometimes reckless parenting style to the pressures placed on the children to live up to the family name. It's a reminder that even the most iconic families have their messiness. She shows how the Kennedys were shaped not just by their privilege, but by their tragedies, their hopes, and the American dream that sometimes felt more like a burden. But what really makes Doris's work stand out is her ability to blend all these elements into a narrative that's as compelling as any thriller, but grounded in empathy. The Kennedys weren't just historical figures. They were people trying to navigate a spotlight that could both elevate and destroy them. For her readers and listeners, Doris's storytelling is like sitting down with a trusted friend who knows all the family secrets, but in a way that makes you laugh, think, and maybe even appreciate your own family's quirks a little more. Up next, we'll turn to Doris's exploration of Franklin D. Roosevelt, a president whose leadership during the Great Depression and World War II offers a masterclass in resilience and political savvy. If there's one president who practically wrote the manual on how to lead during tough times, it's Franklin D. When the Great Depression hit, and the world was spiraling into chaos, FDR stepped onto the stage like a calm captain steering a ship through a storm, except his ship was the entire United States, and the storm was, well, economic apocalypse with a side of global war. Doris Kearns Goodwin's portrait of Roosevelt is anything but your average textbook summary. She digs deep into what made FDR tick, his incredible resilience, sharp political instincts, and a personality that combined steely determination with a folksy charm. It's like she's whispering, yeah, this guy had polio and spent a lot of time in a wheelchair. But don't let that fool you. He was the ultimate political ninja. And the way Doris describes FDR's fireside chats, pure magic. Imagine tuning into your radio to hear the president talk to you like a neighbor over the fence, explaining complex policies without sounding like a dusty academic. Doris shows how those chats weren't just political communication. They were carefully crafted moments of connection that reassured a scared nation. It's like FDR invented the political podcast decades before podcasts were even a thing. But Roosevelt wasn't all smooth speeches and inspirational moments. Doris is refreshingly honest about the man's flaws and contradictions. For example, his willingness to concentrate power in the executive branch raised eyebrows. Some people worried he was acting like a one-man band conducting the entire orchestra of government. Plus, his handling of certain social issues was, to put it mildly, a mixed bag. Doris doesn't sugarcoat these controversies, but presents them as part of the complex portrait of a leader navigating unprecedented challenges. One of the most fascinating aspects Doris explores is Roosevelt's leadership style, especially how he built and managed his brain trust, a diverse group of advisors he relied on to help craft the New Deal. This team wasn't a group of yes-men, but a collection of sharp minds who challenged him, sometimes causing fiery debates in the Oval Office. Doris paints these moments vividly, showing that great leadership often means listening, adjusting, and sometimes embracing chaos. And there's plenty of humor sprinkled throughout these stories, like the time FDR reportedly tried to do a presidential wave that ended up looking more like a confused seagull flapping its wings, because even presidents have awkward moments. Doris's portrayal of Roosevelt makes you realize that leadership isn't about perfection, it's about persistence, empathy, and sometimes a willingness to stumble forward when the world is falling apart. In other words, if you ever feel like you're barely holding it together on a Monday morning, just remember, FDR did it with a smile and a cane during some of the hardest years in history. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is basically the poster child for how to keep calm and lead on, even when everything feels like it's falling apart. If 2020 taught us anything, it's that crises come in waves, and FDR was the original crisis manager, juggling not one but two massive disasters at once, the Great Depression and World War II. If multitasking was an Olympic sport, Roosevelt would have taken gold with one hand tied behind his back, and yes, in a wheelchair. Doris Kearns Goodwin's work makes you feel like you're right there in the Oval Office, watching Roosevelt strategize, joke, and occasionally trip over his own cane. She paints a picture of a man who refused to let polio define him. Although, to be honest, he probably had some moments where he wanted to hide under his presidential desk and binge-watch the news instead of making it. One of the most fascinating things Doris reveals is just how intentional FDR was about connecting with ordinary Americans. Those famous fireside chats weren't just a cute idea. They were masterclasses in communication. Roosevelt spoke directly into people's living rooms through the radio, breaking down complicated economic policies with the simplicity of a friendly neighbor, explaining how to fix a leaky faucet. He didn't just want to inform, he wanted to comfort. Imagine if today's politicians could channel even a fraction of that warmth. Political Twitter would be a lot less savage, but it wasn't just the soothing voice that won people over. Roosevelt had the uncanny ability to make bold moves when it mattered most. The New Deal, which some critics called a government takeover and others called a lifeline, was a series of programs designed to get America back on its feet. Doris takes you behind the scenes, showing the endless debates, the political pushback, and the creative problem-solving that went into programs like Social Security and the Civilian Conservation Corps. Basically, Roosevelt turned the government into a massive get-back-on-your-feet support system. Long before that was a popular slogan on motivational posters. Still, Doris doesn't paint FDR as a flawless superhero. For example, his decision to intern Japanese Americans during World War II remains one of the darkest stains on his legacy, a reminder that even great leaders can make serious mistakes. Doris explores these controversies honestly, highlighting the tension between wartime fears and civil liberties. It's a sobering look at how leadership is never black and white, but often a messy grey zone. What also stands out in Doris's storytelling is Roosevelt's team, the so-called Brain Trust. These advisors weren't yes men. They argued, debated, and sometimes drove FDR up the wall. But he valued their expertise and was willing to change course when convinced. It's a powerful lesson in leadership humility. Knowing when to listen can be just as important as knowing when to speak. And let's not forget the lighter moments, because even presidents have awkward human bits. Doris shares anecdotes about FDR's folksy charm, like his knack for telling jokes to ease tension or the infamous presidential wave that reportedly looked like a confused seagull flapping its wings. It's a reminder that even the most powerful people are, at the end of the day, just people, sometimes awkward, often trying their best. Roosevelt's story is a reminder that resilience isn't about never falling down, it's about standing up, even when your legs or your country feel weak. And Doris Kearns Goodwin captures that spirit beautifully, offering listeners both inspiration and a grounded look at what it really means to lead during crisis. When you think of Abraham Lincoln, a few things probably pop into your head: the tall stovepipe hat, that iconic beard, and the Gettysburg Address that still makes history teachers cry with pride. But Doris Kearns Goodwin doesn't just tell you who Abe was. She dives into the roller coaster of a life and leadership that turned a nation upside down, while growing one heck of a beard. Lincoln's rise from a log cabin in Kentucky to the White House is basically the ultimate rags to riches story, except with more rail splitting and fewer catchy movie montages. Doris highlights how Abe's early years were tough. Think less Little House on the Prairie charm and more endless hard work, near starvation and some serious self-education. If Lincoln was alive today, he'd probably have an epic How I Made It TED Talk about perseverance, or at least a viral YouTube video titled From Dirt Floor to President, My Journey. But it's not just Lincoln's backstory that's compelling, it's how he led during the most divisive and violent period in American history. Doris paints the Civil War as this brutal tug-of-war that tested every fiber of Lincoln's character. She shows us a leader juggling personal tragedy, political chaos, and the sheer weight of holding a fractured country together. Spoiler, the guy had zero time for nonsense. One of the funniest things Doris shares is how Lincoln's beard wasn't just a fashion choice, but a political strategy. A little girl named Grace Bedell wrote to him suggesting he grow a beard to look more presidential. And Abe actually took the advice. Imagine a future president taking hair tips from a kid. It's like a plot twist in a historical rom-com, but Lincoln's leadership was far more than his beard. Doris highlights his deep empathy, sharp political mind, and an almost uncanny ability to navigate the tricky waters of wartime politics. He wasn't afraid to make unpopular decisions, like issuing the Emancipation Proclamation, but he did so with a clear vision for what the country could become. And while Abe is often portrayed as the solemn, serious president, Doris doesn't shy away from showing his humor. Lincoln loved a good joke, sometimes using humor to diffuse tension or connect with soldiers and politicians alike. Imagine cracking dad jokes in the middle of a civil war. Only Lincoln could pull it off. Doris Kearns Goodwin's portrayal gives you a front row seat to Lincoln's struggles and triumphs, making you realize that being great isn't about perfection. It's about courage, humility, and a beard that could rival any influencer's Instagram feed. So what have we learned from Doris Kearns Goodwin? Besides the fact that presidents often had way more interesting, and sometimes downright quirky lives than those stiff history books let on, Doris shows us the real power of history. It's not just about dates and battles, but about people, flawed, funny, determined, and all too human. From FDR's fireside chats that felt like a warm cup of cocoa on a cold night, to Lincoln's beard that changed history more than any law, Doris pulls back the curtain on leadership, resilience, and the messy art of making tough choices. She reminds us that even the biggest figures in history were just people trying to figure things out, sometimes failing spectacularly, sometimes succeeding against all odds. And maybe, just maybe, if we listen closely enough, we can pick up some of their wisdom without growing a presidential beard or having to steer a country through a world war. Though hey, if you want to try the beard, I'm not judging. Doris Kearns Goodwin isn't just writing history, she's bringing it to life with drama, humor, and an insider's scoop that keeps us hooked. So next time you think history is boring, remember, behind every president is a story that's stranger, funnier, and more inspiring than fiction. History isn't all about swords and cannons. Sometimes it involves a wild menagerie of animals that turned the battlefield into something resembling a chaotic zoo. And no, we're not talking about the medieval knight's trusty horse. Though horses had their moments of drama too, we're diving into the truly bizarre instances where animals became unexpected warriors, distractions, or downright chaos machines. Let's start with elephants, the original tanks, before the tank was a thing. In ancient battles, armies would unleash war elephants that stomped through enemy lines, like the prehistoric equivalent of a moving bulldozer. But here's the kicker. These elephant warriors were as prone to freaking out as your average house cat when the vacuum turns on. There's a famous tale from the Battle of Heraclea in 280 BC, where the elephants, faced with Roman soldiers' clever use of loud noises and sharp objects, panicked and ran amok, trampling their own troops. Imagine being the guy whose day gets ruined because an elephant just decided to throw a tantrum and crush your friends. Not the kind of backup you want. Fast forward to the Napoleonic Wars, and we find an equally bizarre animal involvement: the carrier pigeons. These feathered messengers were like the ancient version of text messaging, but without autocorrect or emojis. Napoleon's army relied on pigeons to send messages across battle lines, which was genius until a well-aimed hawk turned their text convo into a pigeon party gone wrong. Pigeon warfare 0 stars for stealth. Then there's the story of the Mongols, who reportedly used camels to terrorize enemy horses. because camels apparently smell so bad that horses would bolt at the mere whiff. It's like biological warfare, but instead of chemicals, you just bring the stink. Smelly camels, the original psychological weapon. And who could forget the siege of Kaffa in 1346, where the Mongols catapulted plague-infected corpses over city walls? While humans definitely got involved in this one, the corpses became grim biological grenades that may have helped spread the Black Death into Europe. Not exactly the cuddliest animal story, but definitely one of the most bizarre intersections of warfare and biology. Even the humble dog got drafted into combat duty. During World War I, dogs served as messengers, sentries, and morale boosters. But one particularly cheeky incident involved a dog trained to carry explosives that accidentally went the wrong way and blew up its own unit's supplies. Talk about a rough day at the office. These examples prove that animals in battle aren't just background extras. They often became the star players of chaos, confusion, and unintended comedy. Who knew history's fiercest fights sometimes had four-legged, feathered, or even smelly participants stealing the spotlight? Let's not forget the legendary war dogs of the ancient world. The Romans, Greeks, and Persians all had canine units, basically the original canine squad. But these dogs weren't just cute mascots, they were trained for battle, which sounds heroic until you realize sometimes they got a bit too enthusiastic. There's a story about a Roman war dog that instead of charging into battle, decided it was way more interested in chasing its own tail. Maybe the dog was just trying to dodge the chaos. Can't blame him, really. Then there's the curious case of the Battle of Pelusium in 525 BC, where the Egyptians reportedly tried to use cats as a kind of living shield. Since cats were sacred in Egypt, Persian attackers allegedly catapulted piles of dead cats over the city walls to terrify the defenders into surrender. Imagine the psychological warfare meeting gross-out tactics. The Egyptians might have thought, not the cats, anything but the cats. It's the ancient version of someone threatening your phone like, give me your password, or I'll delete your selfies. Speaking of throwing animals, the use of flaming pigs in warfare is another eyebrow-raising tactic that sounds like it was invented by pranksters on an ancient battlefield. The Romans supposedly set pigs on fire and sent them squealing towards enemy war elephants, causing those already anxious pachyderms to panic and trample their own lines. So the next time you think your neighbor's pet pig is just a backyard quirk, remember that somewhere in history, pigs were weaponized with all the subtlety of a fireworks display. Oh, and how could we overlook the carrier pigeons again? Not just messengers, but sometimes they became the unsuspecting spies of their day. During World War I, some pigeons carried tiny cameras strapped to their legs to snap aerial photographs of enemy positions. Picture a pigeon thinking it's just a regular flyby and suddenly becoming a feathered secret agent. You want me to do what with this tiny camera? I just wanted breadcrumbs, man. Even the sea creatures have a weird history in war. The ancient Greeks tried to use jars of snakes to startle enemy soldiers. Imagine opening a jar on the battlefield, only to unleash a swarm of hissing, slithering chaos. Not the kind of surprise party anyone wants to attend. And then, in one of the more bizarre animal battle stories, during World War II, the British experimented with bat bombs. Bats equipped with tiny incendiary devices intended to roost in Japanese buildings and start fires. Thankfully, the project was scrapped before it could be deployed, mostly because accidentally setting your own base on fire is generally frowned upon. Still, can you imagine the briefing? All right, team, unleash the bats. Yes, the bats. No, this is not a Batman movie. All of these moments prove one thing: when it comes to war, humans will try anything to get an edge, even if that means turning animals into unwilling participants in some of history's weirdest battles. If nothing else, history shows us that animals definitely made things more unpredictable, and sometimes a whole lot funnier. If you like your history with a side of, did that really just happen? If you thought war was all about brute force and sharp swords, think again. Sometimes armies got so desperate, bored, or downright inventive that their tactics looked like something straight out of a prank war or a crazy episode of a reality show. Here's where history really flexes its weird muscle. Take the Ghost Army of World War II. No, they weren't an actual bunch of Casper the Friendly Spirits. This was a real unit of the US Army, whose entire mission was to trick the Germans. They used inflatable tanks, fake radio chatter, and loudspeakers blaring fake battle noises to make the enemy think a massive force was nearby. Imagine being a German soldier, hearing all this commotion, then turning around only to see giant rubber tanks flapping in the wind like oversized pool floats. It was like the military version of Now You See Me, Now You Don't, except with much higher stakes and zero magic hats. Or how about the Trojan horse strategy? The original sneaky tactic from ancient Greece wasn't just a fairy tale. The Greeks literally built a giant wooden horse, stuffed it with soldiers, and left it outside Troy as a gift. The Trojans, being the original curious cat types, dragged it inside their city walls, only to be greeted by an ambush once night fell. Lesson learned: if something looks suspiciously like a giant horse-shaped gift, maybe don't bring it inside your fortress. Also, beware of gifts from the Greeks. Then there's the bizarre naval tactic used by the British during the War of Jenkins' Ear. Yes, that's a real war named after a severed ear. More on that another time. The British used fake fireships, vessels loaded with explosives and set ablaze to ram enemy fleets. It was basically a floating Molotov cocktail. The sight of a blazing ship heading your way was enough to send even the toughest sailors scrambling. Sort of like when someone tosses a smoke bomb in a crowded room and chaos erupts. Only with more water and hopefully fewer lawsuits. Now, here's one that takes psychological warfare to a whole new level. During the First Punic War, the Romans reportedly used loud noises and clanging metal to scare enemy war elephants. Apparently, the elephants weren't fans of heavy metal concerts. The tactic worked so well the elephants stampeded back into their own lines, causing chaos among their own troops. Who knew the secret to victory was just cranking up the volume? Speaking of noise, during the Battle of the Crater in the American Civil War, Union troops dug a massive tunnel under Confederate lines and detonated explosives to create a giant crater. The idea was to then rush in and break the enemy defenses. Unfortunately, the aftermath turned into a muddy nightmare, with soldiers stuck in the crater like it was a giant sandpit at a very unfriendly playground. Sometimes, the most brilliant tactics turn into the most embarrassing fails. And then there's the time the French army used bat bombs in World War II. Oh wait, we already talked about that. Well, it's just too crazy to leave out twice. These ridiculous tactics might not have always worked, but they show how armies will try anything to outsmart, confuse, or scare the enemy, sometimes with hilarious results. If you ever think your own problems are wild, just remember someone once tried to fight a war with giant inflatable tanks and noise machines. Now, if you thought fake tanks and noise machines were the height of odd, wait till you hear about the use of war goats. Yes, goats. In the 18th century, some armies strapped explosives to goats and sent them charging at enemy lines. Imagine being a soldier in the 1700s, suddenly facing a goat that looks like it's auditioning for an action movie with a bomb on its back. It's like, is that goat charging, or just really committed to brunch plans? Spoiler, the goat plans usually didn't go well, mostly because goats, unlike robots, have minds of their own and might just run off to nibble grass instead. Then, the catapult of dead bodies, not exactly your friendly neighborhood snowball fight. Ancient armies sometimes hurled the bodies of their fallen enemies into enemy cities to spread disease and terror. Talk about an early form of biological warfare. Imagine the horror of trying to enjoy your morning coffee, only to have a gift of decomposing bodies land on your doorstep. Not exactly the kind of mail you want. And who can forget the Greek fire, the medieval version of a flamethrower? It was a terrifying weapon that could burn even on water, which probably gave sailors second thoughts about going near the sea, and also about their job choices. Greek fire was so secretive that its formula was lost to history, making it one of the original top-secret military technologies. If someone today tried to market a fire that burns underwater, you can bet it would be labeled totally safe and FDA approved. Yeah, right. Speaking of secret weapons, the Great Molasses Flood of 1919 wasn't a battle tactic, but it's worth a mention because it shows how sometimes nature or industrial disasters is the weirdest enemy. A giant tank of molasses burst in Boston, flooding streets and knocking down buildings. Imagine the battle cries. Retreat! The sticky sweet enemy is advancing. Luckily no armies were involved, but the event was sticky enough to feel like a slow-motion battle against desert. Let's not overlook the warrior monks of medieval Europe, the Knights Templar and Hospitallers, who combined religious fervor with battlefield tactics. These guys took the idea of holy war literally, charging into battles with swords in one hand and prayers in the other. It's like if your local church choir suddenly decided to add sword fights to their Sunday routine. Talk about multitasking. Back to odd tactics. The blanket of peace wasn't actually a weapon, but a strange diplomatic gesture. In some cultures, offering a blanket was a way to declare peace, which probably confused a lot of warriors who expected swords, not textiles. Imagine being mid-battle and someone throws a blanket at you. What is this? A hug or a ceasefire? And just when you thought things couldn't get stranger, let's talk about the Catawba Indian tribe's war dance during the American Revolutionary War. They'd perform energetic dances and loud war cries that apparently terrified enemy soldiers, because who wants to face a bunch of people who look like they just had 3 espressos and a bad attitude? Psychological warfare? More like disco warfare. Lastly, the Battle of Caranzabes in 1788 is a prime example of chaos. As a tactic, though totally unintentional, Austrian troops supposedly started fighting each other in the dark, fueled by miscommunication and alcohol. This friendly fire incident ended with hundreds of casualties, because sometimes the most effective weapon is confusion, or just people not knowing who's on their side. Moral of the story: never mix war and whiskey. So, between war goats, flaming liquids, secret fire formulas, and accidental battles against your own troops, the history of odd tactics is a goldmine of what were they thinking moments. These stories prove war isn't always about strategy and strength. It's sometimes about sheer madness, and frankly, a bit of slapstick. Not every battle ends with a heroic charge, or a strategic mastermind outwitting the enemy. Sometimes, both sides just look at each other, sigh, and think, you know what? Let's call it a day, or maybe a few years. Yes, some of history's most bizarre battles didn't end with dramatic glory, but with soldiers too wiped out to care. Take the Battle of the Whistling Swans. Okay, that's not the official name, but stick with me. This is a nickname for some skirmishes, where armies fought so fiercely, they wore themselves out and had to pause, because even the horses looked like they needed a nap. Both sides basically ended up lying in the mud, catching their breath, and reconsidering their life choices. One of the most famous examples is the Battle of Agincourt in 1415 during the 100 Years' War. After hours of muddy slogging and arrow volleys that looked like medieval rain, both armies were exhausted. The French knights, dressed in armor that weighed about as much as a small car, were basically heat-stroked and spent. The English longbowmen, meanwhile, had been pulling strings tighter than your grandma's knitting for hours. After the English victory, everyone probably agreed that a hot meal and a soft bed sounded better than another round of let's stab each other. Then there's the Battle of Verdun in World War I, which lasted a staggering 10 months. Imagine fighting a battle so long, both sides forgot what day it was, and just wanted it to end so they could finally clean their socks. The soldiers endured mud, rats, and artillery barrages that never seemed to stop. It's like being stuck in a never-ending, very brutal game of tag, where the stakes are slightly higher than bragging rights. Even more amusingly, some battles ended simply because the troops ran out of ammo or food. Without modern logistics, armies had to rely on supply lines that were about as reliable as a teenager promising to do their homework. One such battle during the Napoleonic Wars ended abruptly when both sides realized they were too hungry to keep fighting. Hunger pangs trumped patriotism that day, and soldiers wandered off looking for the nearest bakery. There was even a battle where both sides took a break to negotiate while the local villagers threw a party. That's right. One moment, soldiers were ready to kill each other. The next, they were sharing drinks, dancing, and swapping stories. It's like a spontaneous peace treaty fueled by good vibes, and maybe some surprisingly good ale. And in the wild world of tribal warfare, in the Amazon, some fights ended when the warriors decided that the real enemy was mosquito bites. After hours of swinging spears and dodging arrows, they'd call it quits because nothing saps your will to fight faster than itching non-stop. That, or someone finally realized their sandals were a bad choice for jungle combat. So next time you think your job is tiring, just remember, soldiers throughout history have dropped their weapons, not because they were defeated, but because they were too tired, too hungry, or just plain over it. Sometimes, peace wasn't won with a sword, but with a collective yawn and a let's sleep on it. History isn't just about epic victories and brilliant generals, it's also about those moments when armies just throw in the towel, not because someone got defeated, but because they all collectively agreed that continuing was a terrible idea. When both sides are so drained, they'd rather binge-watch the latest drama than keep swinging swords. You know the battle has officially turned into a who can survive the longest without collapsing contest. One of the most amusing examples comes from the Battle of the Ice in 1242, also known as the Battle on Lake Peipus. Imagine two armies squaring off on a frozen lake. This was medieval warfare meets Winter Olympics. The fighting was so intense and chilly that both sides probably wondered if they should just grab some hot cocoa instead. After hours of combat on slippery ice, soldiers on both sides were reportedly slipping, falling, and too exhausted to even chase their opponents. The lake itself became the unwilling referee, sending people crashing like clumsy figure skaters. Eventually, the battle wound down because neither side could find the energy or footing to keep going. Frostbite 1, War 0. Then, take the Battle of the Somme in World War I, a grinding slog that lasted months and turned soldiers into zombies. Not the fun kind with moaning and shuffling, more like can't feel their legs, zombies. The sheer length and horror of the battle exhausted everyone so badly that sometimes the fighting paused just because both sides' soldiers had to recover from shock, mud, and what the heck just happened moments. The constant artillery barrages were less boom and more drum solo gone horribly wrong. Soldiers got so tired that when fighting resumed, it was sometimes less about strategy and more about whoever could keep their eyes open. In another amusing twist, the Battle of Karansabis in 1788 is legendary for being the kind of battle where confusion and exhaustion teamed up for chaos. Austrian troops, reportedly drunk and disorganized, mistook each other for enemies and started fighting amongst themselves. The real enemy? Their own fatigue, paranoia, and too much schnapps. The battle ended not because one side won, but because the entire army was so exhausted and disoriented that fighting themselves seemed like a good idea at the time. The moral, if you're going to battle, maybe keep the party for after the victory, not to be outdone. The Battle of Cannae, 216 BC, famous for Hannibal's brutal tactics against the Romans, also had moments when soldiers were so spent they could barely lift their weapons. Though Hannibal's double envelopment was a military masterpiece, the day-long fight saw both sides practically collapsing under the weight of their armor and fatigue. In the end, the Romans lost not just to Hannibal's genius, but to their own worn-out legs and lungs. It's a reminder that sometimes stamina is as deadly as strategy. And it wasn't just the infantry that got tired. Cavalry units, responsible for charging and quick strikes, often found themselves sore and breathless. Charging full speed in heavy gear isn't like a casual jog in the park. It's more like running a marathon in a sauna wearing a metal suit. After a few charges, horses and riders alike needed serious breaks, and sometimes battles paused simply because no one could muster the energy for another gallop. Even in more recent history, exhaustion played a starring role. During the Korean War's Battle of Chosin Reservoir, brutal cold, hunger, and relentless fighting left soldiers on both sides utterly spent. The brutal weather conditions added an extra layer of fatigue that made continuing the fight feel like a bad idea for everyone involved. It wasn't just a battle against the enemy. It was a battle against your own freezing fingers and a growling stomach. So, from frozen lakes to endless muddy trenches, from drunken friendly fire to marathon charges, history shows us that sometimes the best way to win, or at least survive, is to admit you're just too wiped out to keep going. War isn't always about glory. Sometimes it's about knowing when to say, "I'm done," and taking a nap. So what have we learned from these epic showdowns that ended not with a bang, but with a collective "I'm too tired for this"? Well, history isn't always about dramatic victories or heroic last stands. Sometimes it's about the simple reality that even the fiercest warriors need a break. A really, really long break. Whether it was slipping and sliding on frozen lakes like clumsy ice dancers, the fighting in muddy trenches until everyone forgot what day it was, or accidentally shooting your own team because you were too exhausted and confused to tell friend from foe. These battles prove one thing: war is hard work, and sometimes the toughest opponent is just your own exhaustion. Add in freezing weather that turns you into a human popsicle, armor that doubles as a medieval bodyweight workout, and horses that would rather nap than charge. And it's no wonder some battles ended with everyone just agreeing to call it quits. Honestly, It's the kind of history lesson that makes you appreciate your comfy couch and a decent night's sleep. So next time you're feeling wiped out after a long day, just remember, at least you're not a soldier in the middle of a battle, wondering if you'll ever get to lie down again without someone shouting charge or reload. History's weirdest battles remind us that sometimes the best victory is knowing when to put down your sword, take a deep breath, and maybe, just maybe, sneak in a nap.